The concrete floor of Riverside storage felt cold beneath Marcus Chen's knees as he pried open the final crate in Unit 47B. 3 days ago, he'd been a night janitor scraping together rent money. Now, emeralds the size of golf balls glittered in his flashlight beam, each stone worth more than his annual salary. What the other bidders didn't know was that Marcus had spent 15 years as an art authentication specialist for Scotland Yard before a scandal destroyed his career. He recognized these pieces immediately. They matched perfectly with the inventory photos from the 1971 Crown Jewels heist, the most infamous unsolved case in British history. The theft that had haunted him for decades, the one case that broke his spirit and sent him into hiding. But as sirens wailed in the distance and black SUVs surrounded the storage facility, Marcus realized someone had been watching, waiting for these treasures to surface. The real question wasn't how the jewels ended up in a $10 storage unit. It was why someone wanted him to find them. Marcus's hands trembled as he lifted the ornate tiara from its velvet-lined case. The Meridian crown, supposedly destroyed in the Tower of London fire that same year. Yet here it was, pristine and undamaged, its diamonds catching the harsh fluorescent light filtering through the unit's metal door. His trained eye caught details others would miss, the microscopic scratches on the band's underside, the slight discoloration where the central ruby had been reset. This wasn't a replica. The sirens grew louder. Marcus quickly photographed each piece with his phone, muscle memory from his Scotland Yard days taking over. Document everything, trust nothing, question everyone. The mantra that had served him well until Detective Inspector Hawthorne's betrayal left him radioactive in law enforcement circles. He'd almost missed the storage auction entirely. If his landlord hadn't been threatening eviction, if he hadn't scraped together his last $10 hoping to find something worth selling, he'd still be mopping floors at the Westfield shopping centre. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The unit had looked worthless from the outside. Old furniture covered in dust sheets, stacked boxes marked Aunt Millicent's things, and a collection of paint cans that probably predated the moon landing. The other bidders, antique dealers and bargain hunters, had taken one look and walked away. Only Marcus had noticed the way the dust patterns didn't quite match, how the old furniture showed signs of careful arrangement rather than abandonment. Now, surrounded by artifacts that could rewrite history, he understood why the unit's previous owner had paid rent faithfully for 52 years before mysteriously stopping last month. Someone had been protecting these treasures, keeping them hidden until the right moment. But why now? And why him? He killed his flashlight and pressed against the back wall, mind racing through possibilities. Someone had been monitoring the storage facility, waiting for these specific items to be discovered. But they'd acted too quickly, revealing their hand before securing the contents. That suggested desperation or poor planning, neither particularly comforting thoughts. Through the gap under the unit's door, Marcus saw polished black shoes and tactical boots. Mixed team, then, government types working with private security or military contractors. The kind of people who appeared when national security interests trumped legal niceties. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Rear exit. Blue van. 30 seconds. Marcus stared at the message. Someone else was playing this game, someone who wanted him alive and free, but trusting mysterious benefactors had gotten him into trouble before. The memory of Hawthorne's smile as the corruption charges destroyed Marcus's reputation still burned. Another text arrived. They killed the unit's previous owner. You're next unless you move, now. The sound of bolt cutters biting through the unit's lock made the decision for him. Marcus slipped through the emergency exit he'd spotted earlier, a maintenance opening that led to the facility's rear loading dock. Sure enough, a blue van idled in the shadows, its driver obscured by tinted windows. As he ran toward uncertainty, Marcus felt the brooch's weight in his pocket. Whatever game he'd stumbled into, he was now a player whether he liked it or not. The crown jewels were just the beginning. Behind him, shouts erupted as his pursuers discovered the empty unit. The van's door slid open as he approached, revealing darkness within. Marcus hesitated for a heartbeat, then climbed inside. Sometimes survival meant choosing the devil you didn't know over the one kicking down your door. The storage unit's metal door groaned as Marcus yanked it higher, revealing more of the cluttered interior. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the opening, and the musty smell of neglect hit his nostrils. He stepped inside, phone flashlight in hand, surveying his $10 gamble. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, some sagging with moisture damage, others still sturdy. A grandfather clock stood sentinel in the corner, its pendulum silent. Furniture draped in yellowed sheets created ghostly shapes in the dim space. Marcus had bought storage unit contents before, usually yielding nothing more than outdated electronics and moth-eaten clothes. But something about this particular auction had felt different. He approached the nearest box, noting the careful handwriting on its side. E.H. Personal Papers, 1952. The tape had long since lost its adhesive power, and the flaps opened easily. Inside, manila folders contained what appeared to be correspondence, typed letters on official letterhead, and photographs in protective sleeves. Marcus lifted out a black and white photograph, squinting at the formal group portrait. Men in military uniforms stood beside elegantly dressed women, their faces serious and dignified. One figure in the center wore an elaborate crown that seemed almost too large for her head. He flipped the photo over and read the faded ink. Coronation preparations, May 1953, the real ceremony. His brow furrowed. The real ceremony? Everyone knew the coronation had been televised, watched by millions. He set the photo aside and continued digging through the folder. More photographs emerged, showing the same crown from different angles, detailed close-ups of its intricate metalwork and gleaming jewels. But something was wrong with the pictures. The crown in these images looked different from the one he remembered seeing in documentaries. The central diamond was positioned differently, and the cross at the top appeared to be missing entirely. Marcus opened another folder and found typed documents bearing official seals. His eyes scanned the dense text until certain phrases jumped out: replica commission approved, security protocols for substitution, and original location classified. A chill ran down his spine as the implications began to sink in. He grabbed another photograph from the box, this one showing the familiar crown from the official coronation footage, side by side with the crown from the earlier pictures. Even to his untrained eye, the differences were unmistakable. The shapes of the jewels, the pattern of the metalwork, even the proportions were different. The sound of footsteps outside the storage facility made him freeze. Voices carried on the wind, too distant to make out words, but close enough to send his pulse racing. Marcus quickly stuffed the photographs and documents back into their folders, his hands trembling slightly. Whatever he had stumbled upon, instinct told him to keep it quiet. The voices outside were getting closer. Marcus made a quick decision, wrapping the ruby back in its cloth and shoving it into his jacket pocket, along with the most important-looking documents and photographs. He closed the trunk and backed toward the storage unit entrance, his mind reeling with questions. If these artifacts were authentic, they suggested that the British Crown jewels, symbols of centuries of monarchy and tradition, might not be what they appeared. The implications were staggering. How many people knew the truth? And more importantly, how dangerous would it be for him now that he knew? Marcus pulled down the storage unit door and snapped the new lock into place, acutely aware of the weight of the ruby in his pocket. As he walked back toward the facility office to complete his paperwork, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a dramatic and potentially deadly turn. The voices he had heard were nowhere to be seen, but somehow that made him even more nervous. The photograph slipped from Marcus's trembling fingers, landing face up on the concrete floor of the storage unit. Even in the dim light, the image was unmistakable: 3 people in formal attire standing beside what appeared to be an ornate crown resting on a velvet cushion. But it wasn't just any crown. The distinctive arches and cross-patty were burned into every British citizen's memory from countless coins and stamps. Marcus crouched down, his janitor's knees protesting against the cold concrete. He picked up the photograph with the reverence of someone handling a live grenade. The woman in the center wore an elegant gown from what looked like the 1940s, her dark hair perfectly coiffed. To her left stood a tall man in military dress uniform, and to her right, someone whose face had been deliberately scratched out with what appeared to be a fountain pen. "This can't be real," he whispered to himself, but his voice carried no conviction. He turned the photograph over. In faded ink, someone had written, "The true ceremony, Iwu, May 15th, 1953. His breath caught. May 15th was 3 weeks before the official coronation that the entire world had witnessed. Marcus's mind raced as he looked back into the jewelry case. What he had initially dismissed as costume pieces now seemed to pulse with significance under his phone's flashlight. A ring bearing the same distinctive cross design, a bracelet with stones that caught the light like captured starfire, and beneath it all, wrapped in what appeared to be official documents, something that made his mouth go dry. The papers were yellowed with age, covered in official seals and signatures. Even upside down, he could make out phrases that made his hands shake. Rightful succession, documented proof, and most chilling of all, eliminated to preserve the crown. A car door slammed somewhere in the distance, and Marcus nearly jumped out of his skin. The sound echoed through the storage facility like a gunshot, reminding him that he was alone in this maze of metal doors with what might be the most dangerous secret in modern history. He quickly snapped photos of everything with his phone, his fingers stabbing at the screen with desperate efficiency. The camera flash illuminated details he'd missed in the dim light, more photographs, what looked like birth certificates, and documents bearing signatures he didn't recognize but which carried the weight of authority. Another sound made him freeze, footsteps on gravel, measured and deliberate. Someone was walking through the facility, and those footsteps were growing closer. Marcus's survival instincts, honed by years of avoiding trouble, screamed at him to run. But something else, perhaps the same stubborn curiosity that had led him to bid on this unit in the first place, made him grab the most important-looking documents and shove them inside his jacket. The jewelry case would have to wait. He eased the storage unit door down as quietly as possible, but the metal still groaned in protest. The footsteps stopped. In the silence that followed, Marcus could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Moving as quietly as his work boots would allow, he crept toward the facility's main entrance. The footsteps resumed, but now they seemed to be moving in his direction with more purpose. At the corner where his row intersected with the main pathway, Marcus risked a glance backward. A figure in a dark coat was methodically checking unit numbers, a small flashlight cutting through the darkness. Even from a distance, there was something purposeful about the way the person moved. This wasn't someone who had lost their way. Marcus forced himself to walk normally as he approached his van, every instinct screaming at him to run. The papers crinkled against his chest with each step, a constant reminder of what he was carrying. As he fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking from adrenaline rather than cold, he wondered if he was being paranoid, or if his life had actually changed forever in the space of an hour. The van's engine turned over on the second try, and Marcus had never been so grateful for the reliable rumble of his vehicle. As he pulled out of the storage facility, his headlights swept across the entrance. For just a moment, they illuminated the figure he'd seen earlier, a woman with short grey hair and sharp features watching his departure with the focused attention of a predator. Their eyes met through the windshield for perhaps 2 seconds, but it was long enough for Marcus to see something that chilled him to the bone: recognition. Somehow, impossibly, she knew who he was. He drove through the night streets of East London, checking his rearview mirror obsessively, the stolen documents burning against his chest like a brand. Whatever he had stumbled into, there was no going back now. The only question was whether he would live long enough to understand what it all meant. The fluorescent lights of the 24-hour laundromat buzzed overhead as Marcus fed quarters into the washing machine, his hands still trembling from the afternoon's revelations. He'd stuffed the royal artifacts into a duffel bag, wrapped in dirty towels, trying to make them look like ordinary laundry. The weight of centuries pressed against his shoulder as he claimed a plastic chair in the corner, positioning himself where he could watch both entrances. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Hello? Silence, then a click. The third call in 2 hours. Marcus studied the other late-night patrons, a college student with headphones, an elderly woman folding hospital scrubs, a man in a baseball cap reading a newspaper. The man hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. The washing machine cycle seemed endless. Marcus pulled out his phone and searched for Dr. Elena Vasquez, the historian whose business card he'd found in Pemberton's collection. Her university profile showed an impressive resume, specializing in British royal history and authentication of historical artifacts. More importantly, her photo showed kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Marcus set the dryer for 30 minutes and walked to the vending machine, fishing coins from his pocket. In the reflection of the glass front, he saw Baseball Cap fold his newspaper and stand. Time to go. He abandoned the dryer and headed for the back exit, clutching the duffel bag. The alley behind the laundromat reeked of garbage and old grease from the adjacent restaurant. Marcus broke into a run, his work boots splashing through puddles as he zigzagged through the maze of dumpsters and fire escapes. A car engine roared to life behind him. Headlights swept the alley. Marcus dove behind a dumpster as a black sedan crept past, its occupants scanning the shadows with flashlights. He pressed his back against the cold metal, the duffel bag clutched to his chest and waited. The car's taillights disappeared around the corner. The Regency Hotel downtown was the kind of place that asked few questions if you paid cash. Marcus registered under a false name, using his mother's maiden name and claiming he'd lost his ID in a mugging. The desk clerk, a bored-looking kid with purple hair, barely glanced up from his phone. The room was small and smelled of disinfectant, but it had a deadbolt and a view of the fire escape. Marcus wedged a chair under the door handle and spread the artifacts across the faded bedspread, studying them under the harsh overhead light. The crown was even more magnificent up close. Diamonds caught the light like trapped stars, and the goldwork showed craftsmanship that belonged in a museum. But it was the documents that made his pulse race. Letters bearing royal seals, genealogical charts with names crossed out and rewritten, and what appeared to be a will written in elaborate script. Marcus photographed everything with his phone, uploading the images to a cloud storage account he created using a fake email address. If something happened to him, at least there would be a record. His phone rang. Dr. Vasquez's number. He'd found her contact information on the university website. Dr. Vasquez, this is going to sound crazy, but I need your help authenticating some historical artifacts. It's nearly midnight, Mr. Johnson. Marcus Johnson. I know the hour is strange, but this can't wait. I have items that might relate to the British royal family, and I think someone's been killed because of them. A pause. What kind of items? Marcus described the crown and documents, careful not to mention their current location. Dr. Vasquez's breathing changed as he spoke, becoming sharper, more focused. Mr. Johnson, what you're describing, if authentic, these would be incredibly significant. Where did you acquire them? A storage auction. The previous owner, Professor Pemberton, died recently. The police called it an accident, but now I'm not so sure. Pemberton, Harold Pemberton. I knew him. He contacted me months ago about some research he was conducting, something about disputed succession lines. He seemed frightened. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hotel's air conditioning. Will you help me? Meet me tomorrow at my office. 2 o'clock. And Mr. Johnson? Be very careful who else you talk to about this. If Harold was right about what he suspected, there are people who would kill to keep these artifacts hidden. The line went dead. Marcus stared at the crown glittering on the bedspread, wondering if he was looking at the key to a conspiracy that had endured for over a century, or his own death warrant. Marcus stared at the parchment until his eyes burned, the ornate script dancing before him in the dim light of his apartment. The words seemed to mock him with their implications: by royal decree, the rightful heir, falsified death, protected bloodline. He'd read it a dozen times, and each pass made his hands shake a little more. The knock at his door sent ice through his veins. 3 sharp raps, purposeful and measured. Marcus quickly rolled the document and shoved it back into the music box, his fingers fumbling with the hidden compartment. The brass figurine toppled over, and he cursed under his breath as he righted it. "Just a minute," he called out, his voice cracking slightly. He glanced around his shabby studio apartment, suddenly aware of how exposed he was. 1 window facing the fire escape. 1 door with 3 different locks that suddenly seemed inadequate. "Mr. Chen? It's Detective Rivera. We need to talk." Marcus's blood pressure spiked. He recognized the name from news reports about organized crime investigations. What could a detective want with him? Unless... He crept to the peephole and peered out. A woman in her 40s stood in the hallway, her dark hair pulled back severely. She held up a badge, and Marcus could see the genuine weight of authority in her posture. But what caught his attention was the way her eyes kept darting toward the stairwell, as if she were watching for something. "About what?" Marcus called through the door. "About why someone broke into Northside Storage last night. About why Unit 237's previous owner died under suspicious circumstances. About why you might be in serious danger." Marcus's throat went dry. Through the peephole he watched Rivera check her phone, then glanced nervously down the hall again. "How do I know you're really a cop?" Something in her tone made Marcus start turning the locks. As soon as he cracked the door open, Rivera pushed inside and immediately moved to the window. "Pack whatever you need for a few days. Now." She pulled the curtain aside just enough to peer down at the street. Black sedans been circling the block for the past hour. 2 men inside, and they're not here to deliver flowers. Marcus felt the world tilting beneath his feet. "This is insane. I'm just a janitor. I bought some old junk at an auction." "What kind of junk?" Rivera turned from the window, her dark eyes sharp and probing. The music box seemed to pulse with hidden energy from its spot on his kitchen table. Marcus followed her gaze and saw her expression change as she noticed it. "Victorian era," she murmured, moving closer. "Expensive. Very expensive." She looked back at Marcus. What else was in the unit? Just old furniture, some paintings, documents. He couldn't bring himself to mention the parchment or the photographs. Something held him back, a survival instinct screaming that knowledge was dangerous. Rivera's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and cursed in Spanish. "They're moving." 2 men just entered the building through the back entrance. She grabbed Marcus's arm. "Fire escape, now! Wait, I need..." No time. Rivera was already pushing him toward the window. "Whatever you found, bring it. Leave everything else." Marcus grabbed the music box, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the window latch. The metal groaned as it opened, and cold air rushed in from the alley below. Rivera was right behind him as he stepped onto the fire escape, the metal grating swaying under their combined weight. Behind them, Marcus heard the unmistakable sound of his apartment door splintering. "Move!" Rivera hissed, pushing him toward the ladder. "Down 2 flights, then we go up." "Up? That doesn't make sense." "Trust me." Heavy footsteps thundered through his apartment above them, a man's voice, sharp with frustration. "He's not here. Check the fire escape." Rivera pressed something cold and metallic into Marcus's hand. "A spare gun. Ever fired one of these?" Marcus shook his head, clutching the music box against his chest with one arm while gripping the unfamiliar weapon with the other. Below them, the alley stretched into darkness, and above, shadows moved against his window. For a janitor who just wanted to turn $10 into something better, his life had become unrecognizable. The fluorescent lights of the library's basement archive hummed overhead as Marcus spread the stolen documents across the metal table. His hands trembled slightly as he photographed each page with his phone, the camera's flash illuminating centuries-old seals and signatures that could topple governments. Dr. Elizabeth Thorne sat across from him, her academic composure cracking as she examined the papal decree. "This changes everything we know about the succession," she whispered, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. "If this is authentic, King Edward never legally abdicated. The entire Windsor line is illegitimate," Marcus finished, his voice hoarse. The weight of the revelation pressed down on him like a physical force. 3 days ago, his biggest worry had been making rent. Now he held evidence that could rewrite history books. Elizabeth pulled out a magnifying glass and studied the document's watermarks. "The paper stock is correct for the period. The ink composition appears accurate, but we need proper authentication, carbon dating, spectroscopic analysis." She looked up at him. "Where exactly did you find this?" Marcus hesitated. Trust had become a luxury he couldn't afford, not when bullets had shattered his apartment window just hours ago, but he needed allies, and Dr. Thorne's reputation in medieval British history was impeccable. A storage unit, along with other items that suggest someone has been hiding this for decades. What kind of other items? Before Marcus could answer, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. His chest tightened as he answered. "I don't know what you're talking about." A low chuckle. "The storage unit, Unit 247, you paid $67 for items worth considerably more than £10 million. My employer would like them returned." Marcus's blood ran cold. They knew everything. The unit number, the auction price, probably his entire life story. "Who is your employer?" "Someone who values discretion above all else. Someone who has kept certain historical inaccuracies properly buried for the better part of a century. You have 24 hours to return what you've taken, all of it, including any copies you may have made." "And if I don't?" "Mr. Webb, you're a bright man. I'm certain you can imagine the consequences." The line went dead. Elizabeth had gone pale, having overheard the conversation. "Marcus, this is bigger than academic fraud. People have died protecting secrets like this." "I know." He gathered the documents, his mind racing. "Which is why we need to move fast. If we can get this information public, verified and broadcast before they silence us, they'll claim it's forgeries, conspiracy theories. Without proper authentication, we have nothing but old papers that could have been fabricated yesterday." Elizabeth stood, pacing between the archive shelves. "We need time to prove authenticity, but time is exactly what we don't have." Marcus pulled up his phone's photo gallery, scrolling through images of the other artifacts from the storage unit. "What if I told you there were more documents? Bills of sale, correspondence, shipping manifests, all pointing to a systematic effort to hide not just papers but physical evidence." "What kind of physical evidence?" He showed her a photograph of an ornate golden scepter, its head adorned with what appeared to be the Star of Africa diamond. Elizabeth gasped. "That's impossible. The sovereign's scepter is in the Tower of London. I've seen it myself." "Have you? Or have you seen a very good replica?" Marcus swiped to another image, a crown that seemed to glow even in the photograph's harsh lighting. What if the real crown jewels were replaced decades ago? What if someone needed them hidden while they worked to legitimize a questionable claim to the throne? Elizabeth sank back into her chair. The coronation of 1937, King George VI. There were rumors at the time about irregularities in the ceremony, delays that were blamed on protocol adjustments after the abdication crisis. But what if those delays were to allow time for substitutions? The implications hung between them like a loaded weapon. If the crown jewels in the tower were replicas, if the real regalia had been hidden away while a questionable succession was solidified, then the entire modern British monarchy was built on fraud. Elizabeth's academic caution warred with the historian's excitement of a discovery that could reshape her field. "We need help, someone with resources, connections, the ability to protect us while we verify this. Who can we trust? If this conspiracy reaches as high as I think it does, there's someone." James Morrison, investigative journalist with The Guardian. He's exposed government cover-ups before, and he has contacts in security services. She grabbed her coat. But first, we need to secure those artifacts. If they're authentic, they're the most valuable objects in Britain. Marcus thought of the storage unit key in his pocket, the small metal piece that had unlocked the secret of the century. 24 hours felt like both an eternity and an instant. The hunt for truth had begun, and the hunters were already closing in. Marcus pressed himself against the cold brick wall of the alleyway, his breath forming small clouds in the night air. The footsteps that had been following him for the past 6 blocks had stopped when he ducked into this narrow passage between 2 Victorian townhouses. His heart hammered against his ribs as he clutched the leather satchel containing the photographs and documents he'd managed to salvage from his apartment. The police had arrived 20 minutes after he'd called Dr. Whitmore. 20 minutes too late to catch whoever had ransacked his place, but perfectly timed to make Marcus look like a madman standing among the wreckage, babbling about stolen crown jewels and royal conspiracies. The skeptical looks from the officers told him everything he needed to know about their assessment of his mental state. A shadow moved at the mouth of the alley. Marcus held his breath, watching as a figure in a dark coat paused under the streetlight. The man's face remained hidden, but something about his posture, alert, predatory, made Marcus's skin crawl. After what felt like an eternity, the figure moved on, his footsteps fading into the ambient noise of the city. Marcus waited another 5 minutes before emerging from his hiding spot. The university library would be closed at this hour, but he knew Dr. Whitmore sometimes worked late in her office. More importantly, the building had security cameras and night guards, witnesses who would make it harder for anyone to simply make him disappear. The campus was eerily quiet as Marcus made his way across the quad. Gothic spires reached toward the starless sky like accusing fingers. Every shadow seemed to harbor potential threats. Every rustle of wind through the autumn leaves made him flinch. He'd never considered himself a paranoid person, but then again, he'd never been in possession of evidence that could topple a monarchy. The history department occupied the 3rd floor of Pemberton Hall. Marcus slipped through a side entrance, grateful that his years of janitorial work had taught him which doors were often left unlocked by absent-minded professors. The elevator seemed too risky, too enclosed, too easily trapped, so he took the stairs 2 at a time. Dr. Whitmore's office light was indeed on, casting a warm rectangle of yellow across the darkened hallway. Marcus approached cautiously, noticing that her door stood slightly ajar. That wasn't like her. She was meticulous about security, especially given the valuable historical documents she often kept in her office. "Dr. Whitmore!" he called softly, pushing the door open. The office had been destroyed. Books lay scattered across the floor, their pages torn and crumpled. Her computer monitor had been smashed, its screen a web of cracks reflecting the overhead light. Filing cabinets stood open, their contents strewn about like confetti after a violent celebration. But it was the dark stain on the Persian rug behind her desk that made Marcus's blood run cold. The stain was too large, too dark, too fresh to be anything innocent. A sound from the hallway, the soft ping of the elevator arriving, sent Marcus scrambling behind an overturned bookshelf. He clutched the satchel to his chest, barely breathing as measured footsteps approached the office. "Nothing here either," a voice said. British accent, cultured but cold. "Whoever got to her first was thorough. What about the janitor?" A second voice, rougher around the edges. "Any word from the team watching his flat?" "Gone. Slipped away before they could contain the situation. But he's running blind now. No allies, no safe harbor. Fear makes people careless." Marcus closed his eyes, fighting back a wave of nausea. Dr. Whitmore was dead. These people, whoever they were, had killed her because of what he'd shown her, because of what he'd found in that storage unit. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a lead blanket. "Check the university records," the first voice continued. "Anyone else she might have contacted about historical authentication. We can't afford loose ends. And if we find the janitor?" A pause. "The same treatment as the professor. Make it look accidental. A homeless man dying of exposure wouldn't raise many questions. The footsteps retreated down the hallway, followed by the elevator's mechanical whir. Marcus remained hidden for another 10 minutes, his mind racing. Dr. Whitmore had died because she'd tried to help him understand what he'd found. How many others would suffer the same fate if he continued down this path? But the alternative, surrendering the evidence, pretending none of this had ever happened, felt like a betrayal of her memory and everyone else who had died to protect this secret. Marcus emerged from his hiding place and carefully made his way to the window. The campus quad stretched out below, empty except for a few students hurrying between dormitories. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, police or ambulance, he couldn't tell which. He needed allies. He needed someone with the resources and credibility to take this evidence and run with it. Someone these killers couldn't simply eliminate without causing an international incident. The answer came to him as he watched a news van pull up outside the administration building. Sarah Chen, the investigative journalist who'd been digging into government corruption scandals. If anyone would be interested in a story about stolen crown jewels and royal cover-ups, it would be her. The basement of St. Bartholomew's Church smelled of centuries-old stone and forgotten prayers. Marcus followed Professor Whitmore down the narrow spiral staircase, their footsteps echoing in the darkness. The LED flashlight beam danced across weathered walls, revealing ancient symbols carved into the stone. "Few people know about this place," Whitmore whispered, producing an ornate brass key. "The church records dated to 1066, but I suspect it's much older." The heavy door creaked open, revealing a circular chamber lined with stone shelves. Dust motes danced in their flashlight beams like tiny spirits. Marcus clutched the leather satchel containing the crown jewels, his knuckles white with tension. "How do you know about all this?" Marcus asked, setting the bag on a wooden table that looked medieval. Whitmore lit several candles with a match, casting flickering shadows on the walls. "My family has been guardians of certain knowledge for generations. We've watched, waited, and when necessary, intervened." The professor opened the satchel with reverent hands, his eyes widening as the jewels caught the candlelight. "Magnificent and completely authentic, I assure you." He lifted the smaller crown, examining intricate engravings around its base. "These markings, they're not decorative, they're a code." "A code for what?" "The location of the original documentation, the proof that could bring down the House of Windsor entirely." Whitmore traced the symbols with his finger. "Look here, this isn't random Celtic knotwork, it's a map." Marcus leaned closer, squinting at the tiny engravings. The symbols seemed to spiral inward toward the crown's center, where a single ruby gleamed like a drop of blood. "This ruby," Whitmore continued, "isn't just valuable, it's hollow. Watch." He pressed the gem gently, and it clicked inward like a button. A tiny compartment opened, revealing a rolled piece of parchment no bigger than a pencil. Marcus held his breath as Whitmore carefully extracted the parchment and unrolled it on the table. The writing was impossibly small, but legible under their flashlight beam. "My God," Whitmore breathed. "It's written in Latin, but I can make out the essential points. This is a confession dated 1936. King Edward VIII didn't abdicate just to marry Wallis Simpson. He was forced out because he planned to sell state secrets to Nazi Germany in exchange for guaranteed protection when they invaded Britain. But everyone knows he was sympathetic to the Nazis," Marcus said. "Sympathetic, yes. But this suggests active treason. More importantly, it indicates that his brother George, who became King George VI, knew about the plot but covered it up to protect the monarchy. The current Queen's father participated in treason by omission. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. This would destroy them. Completely. The document references supporting evidence hidden in... Whitmore stopped reading, his face pale in the candlelight. "Oh dear, this is worse than I thought." "What?" "The supporting documents are hidden in Balmoral Castle itself, in a sealed chamber beneath the Queen's private study. They include photographs, correspondence with Nazi officials, even financial records showing payments received." A sound from above made them both freeze, footsteps in the church sanctuary, slow and deliberate. Someone was searching. Whitmore immediately began rewrapping the jewels. "They've found us. There's another exit through the old crypt, but we need to move now." Who found us? Could be MI5. Could be private security working for the royals. Could be the people who killed your friend Jake. Does it matter? Marcus grabbed the satchel as Whitmore blew out the candles. The footsteps above grew louder, accompanied by low voices and the creak of wooden pews. "This way," Whitmore whispered, leading him toward a narrow opening in the far wall. "The passage connects to the old plague tunnels. We can emerge 3 blocks away." They crawled through the opening just as the basement door burst open above. Flashlight beams swept the chamber they'd just vacated. "Nothing here," a gruff voice called out. "Check the vestry." The tunnel was barely wide enough for Marcus's shoulders. Ancient bones lined the walls, victims of the Black Death, Whitmore had whispered. Marcus tried not to think about the weight of London pressing down above them as they crawled through the medieval darkness. After what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes, they emerged through a hidden grate in the basement of a Georgian townhouse. Whitmore had a key to this building too, Marcus noticed. The professor's network of safe houses and hidden passages suggested this wasn't his first time playing spy games. "We need to get to Scotland," Whitmore said, brushing cobwebs from his coat. "Those documents in Balmoral Castle are the only way to verify this confession. Without them, we just have allegations." "Scotland? That's hundreds of miles away, and it's a royal castle. We can't just walk in." "Actually," Whitmore smiled grimly, "we can. The castle opens for public tours during certain times of year. And I happen to know someone on the inside who's been waiting 30 years for a chance to expose the truth." The warehouse district felt different at night. What had seemed merely industrial during the day now took on a menacing quality, with shadows that moved independently of their sources and the distant sound of footsteps that might have been echoes or might not have been. Marcus pressed himself against the brick wall of the abandoned textile factory, his heart hammering as he watched the black sedan cruise slowly past the street entrance for the 3rd time in 20 minutes. The driver was taking his time, methodical in his surveillance. Professional. "They found us faster than I expected," Elena whispered beside him, her voice barely audible above the distant hum of traffic from the main road. Marcus clutched the leather satchel containing the photographs and documentation they'd compiled. 3 days of frantic research had yielded more than he'd dared hope and more than he'd feared possible. The evidence was damning. Financial records showing payments to eliminate potential heirs, correspondence between palace officials discussing the inconvenient bloodline. And most damaging of all, a photograph of the real crown jewels being melted down in 1953. The cars stopped, Elena observed, peering around the corner. 2 figures emerged from the sedan, their movements coordinated in a way that spoke of military training. They weren't here to negotiate. Marcus's phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number, building surrounded. "Suggest alternative exit strategy." Who the hell? Marcus showed Elena the message. Her face went pale. "We need to move, now." They slipped deeper into the warehouse complex, navigating by the weak light filtering through grimy windows. The building stretched further back than Marcus had realized, a labyrinth of abandoned machinery and storage areas that might provide temporary sanctuary or become their tomb. Another text arrived, "Loading dock, east wall, 3 minutes." "Someone's playing games with us," Marcus muttered, but Elena was already heading toward what he assumed was east, using a compass app on her phone. The sound of breaking glass echoed from the main entrance behind them. Their pursuers had grown impatient with subtlety. They reached the loading dock to find it empty except for a rusted truck that looked like it hadn't moved in years. Marcus was beginning to think they'd walked into a trap when a section of the corrugated wall slid open with surprising smoothness. Inside, quickly. The voice belonged to a woman in her 60s, grey hair pulled back severely, wearing what looked like an expensive coat over practical boots. She had the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Elena hesitated. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been waiting 40 years for evidence like yours to surface." The woman's eyes fixed on Marcus's satchel. "Lady Catherine Pemberton. And before you ask, yes, I have more claim to certain hereditary positions than the current occupants." Footsteps and shouted commands echoed from inside the warehouse. Their pursuers had found their trail. "Move," Lady Catherine commanded, and something in her voice brooked no argument. They found themselves in a narrow tunnel that ran beneath the warehouse district. The construction was old but solid, with modern lighting that suggested regular maintenance. "Victorian storm drains," Lady Catherine explained as they hurried through the passage. "Extensively modified over the decades by people who found them useful for moving about London unobserved." "You're part of this conspiracy," Elena accused. "My dear, I'm part of the resistance to this conspiracy. My family has been documenting their crimes for generations, waiting for an opportunity to expose the truth." She glanced back at them. When a certain down-on-his-luck janitor began making inquiries about royal artifacts, it attracted attention from both sides of this conflict. They emerged through a hidden exit into the basement of what appeared to be a private residence. Lady Catherine led them up into a library that would have made university scholars weep with envy. Every wall was lined with books, documents, and artifacts. "This is my life's work," she said, gesturing around the room. "Evidence of the greatest fraud ever perpetrated on the British people. The question is, what are you prepared to do with your evidence?" Marcus set his satchel on the massive oak table. "We want to expose the truth. The truth will get you killed. It's gotten 17 people killed over the past 60 years. Lady Catherine's voice carried the weight of personal loss. "The people you're fighting don't merely hold political power. They've built their entire legitimacy on the lie you're threatening to expose." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of an antique clock. "They made it look like an accident," she continued. "But David was the most careful driver I knew. He hid these items hoping someone would eventually find them and understand their significance." Marcus stared at the evidence surrounding them. He'd stumbled into something far larger than a simple fraud, a generational war over truth itself. The abandoned warehouse stretched before Marcus like a concrete tomb, its broken windows staring down at him with hollow eyes. Sarah's footsteps echoed beside his as they approached the rusted door, each sound amplifying the thundering of his heart. 3 days had passed since their narrow escape from Blackwood's men, and the storage unit key felt heavier in his pocket with each step. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Sarah whispered, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid morning air. Marcus checked the address on the yellowed paper one more time. The handwriting matched the documents they'd found with the jewels, Lord Pemberton's careful script detailing his contingency plan. If the old aristocrat had been half as paranoid as his notes suggested, this warehouse held the final pieces of the puzzle. The locks surrendered to their bolt cutters with surprising ease, and the door groaned open to reveal a cavern of shadows and dust. Weak sunlight filtered through the dirty skylights, illuminating rows of covered shapes that looked like sleeping giants. They moved deeper into the space, following the unit numbers painted on the concrete pillars. Marcus's flashlight beam danced across forgotten furniture, stacks of mouldering boxes, and the detritus of lives interrupted. The smell of decay and motor oil hung thick in the air. "Unit 247, Sarah read from a faded sign. "This is it." The storage space was larger than Marcus had expected, sealed behind a roll-up door that required both of them to lift. Inside, neat rows of filing cabinets stood like sentinels, each labeled with dates spanning from 1952 to 1978. But it was the wall of photographs that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. Hundreds of black and white images covered every surface. Surveillance photos, formal portraits, candid shots taken from a distance. At the center hung a large photograph of a young woman in an elegant evening gown, her smile radiant as she danced with a man whose face had been carefully scratched out. "My God!" Sarah breathed, moving closer to examine the photos. "This is Princess Margaret, and this one," she pointed to another image. "That's the Queen Mother, but look at the date. This was taken months after her supposed death." Marcus opened the nearest filing cabinet, his hands trembling as he lifted out a manila folder marked Operation Succession. The documents inside made his blood run cold. Bank transfers, forged death certificates, medical records showing healthy individuals who had supposedly died of natural causes. "They didn't just steal the crown jewels," he said, his voice barely audible. "They've been systematically eliminating and replacing members of the royal family for decades." Sarah pulled out a leather journal from behind the photographs. Its pages crackled as she opened it, revealing Lord Pemberton's meticulous handwriting. "Listen to this," she said, reading aloud. "The substitution of Princess Margaret was completed successfully in June 1964. The actress bears a remarkable resemblance and has been thoroughly trained in royal protocol. The real princess remains in the Scottish facility under sedation." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. If Pemberton's records were accurate, half the royal family's public appearances over the past 3 decades had been performed by carefully selected doubles, while the real royals remained imprisoned or worse. A distant sound made them both freeze. Car engines approaching fast across the gravel lot outside. Marcus grabbed as many files as he could carry while Sarah stuffed the journal into her jacket. "The back exit," she whispered urgently. They ran between the storage units as the main door burst open behind them. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, accompanied by shouted orders and the sound of heavy boots on concrete. Marcus recognized Blackwood's voice among them, cold and precise as he directed his men to spread out and search every unit. The emergency exit had been chained shut, but Marcus's desperation gave him strength he didn't know he possessed. The chain snapped, and they burst into the pale morning light just as shouts erupted from inside the warehouse. Someone had found the open storage unit. They ran across an empty lot toward Sarah's car, parked 3 blocks away as a precaution. Behind them, more vehicles screeched to a halt, disgorging men in dark suits who fanned out to cut off their escape routes. "This way," Sarah gasped, pulling him toward a drainage tunnel that ran beneath the street. The concrete pipe was barely wide enough for them to crawl through, and Marcus fought against claustrophobia as they inched forward through the darkness. They emerged 2 blocks away, muddy and exhausted, but alive. Sarah's car sat untouched where they'd left it, and they climbed inside with shaking hands. As they drove away, Marcus clutched the stolen files against his chest. The evidence they'd found changed everything. This wasn't just about stolen jewelry or royal scandal. It was about a conspiracy so vast and audacious that it had rewritten history itself. But now they had proof. The question was whether they would live long enough to expose it. The safe house felt more like a tomb than sanctuary. Marcus paced the cramped living room while Sarah hunched over her laptop, the blue glow illuminating the dark circles under her eyes. They'd been holed up in the Westminster flat for 3 days, surviving on takeaway containers and mounting paranoia. Every footstep in the hallway, every car engine outside sent Marcus's hand reaching for the baseball bat they'd found in the closet. "I've been thinking about what Lord Pemberton said," Sarah murmured, not looking up from her screen. "About the photographs being the real treasure." Marcus stopped pacing. "The ones from the storage unit? Think about it. Anyone can claim the crown jewels are replicas, but photographs of the actual theft, documentation of who was involved, that's undeniable proof." Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "I've been cross-referencing the faces in those pictures with historical records." She turned the laptop toward him. The black and white photograph filled the screen, the same one they'd found tucked behind the false backing of the jewelry box. 3 men in expensive suits stood beside an ornate safe, its door hanging open. In the background, Marcus could make out the familiar interior of the Tower of London's jewel house. The man on the left, Sarah pointed to a distinguished figure with a prominent moustache. "That's Sir Reginald Ashworth, former keeper of the crown jewels." supposedly died in a car accident in 1952. Supposedly? No body was ever found. The car went off a cliff into the Thames, but they never recovered him. She clicked to another window showing a newspaper headline, "Keeper of Crown Jewels Dies in Tragic Accident." Convenient timing, considering this photograph was taken just weeks before his death. Marcus studied the image more carefully. The man in the center looked younger, perhaps 30, with sharp features and calculating eyes. What about him? That's where it gets interesting. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. I think that's Thomas Blackwood, Lord Pemberton's father. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. His father was in on it? It makes sense. Lord Pemberton wasn't trying to protect the royal family, he was protecting his own legacy. His father helped steal the crown jewels, and if that came out... She trailed off, but Marcus understood the implications. A sound in the hallway made them both freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, stopping right outside their door. Marcus grabbed the bat while Sarah quickly closed the laptop. They waited in darkness, hardly breathing. The footsteps continued past their door and faded down the hall. We can't stay here much longer, Marcus whispered. They'll find us eventually. Sarah nodded, but her attention was already back on the photographs. There's something else. Look at this. She reopened the laptop and zoomed in on the third man in the picture. Unlike the others, his face was partially turned away, but Marcus could see enough to recognize the uniform. Palace Guard. Not just any guard. Look at the insignia. Sarah enhanced the image quality as much as possible. That's Captain Geoffrey Morrison, head of Royal Security. I found his service record. He was responsible for the jewel house during the supposed renovation period. Marcus felt pieces clicking into place, so they had inside help at every level. The keeper, someone from a powerful family, and the head of security. The perfect conspiracy. But something went wrong. Sarah pulled up another document, this one handwritten in faded ink. I found this letter tucked inside one of the photograph envelopes. It's from Ashworth to someone called the Collector. She read aloud. The items are secure, but Morrison grows nervous. He speaks of confession, of returning everything. I fear he may compromise our arrangement. We must consider permanent solutions. A chill ran down Marcus's spine. They killed him. And probably Morrison too. I checked. He died mysteriously just 6 months later. Heart attack at age 35. No previous health problems. Marcus sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they'd uncovered. So the janitor, Harold, somehow got hold of evidence of a conspiracy that involved theft, murder, and a century-long cover-up. And now we have it. Sarah's face was grim. Which means we're next on their list. Before Marcus could respond, his burner phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. We have Dr. Elizabeth Chen. Photographs and jewels for her life. Waterloo Bridge, midnight. Come alone. Marcus's blood turned to ice. Elizabeth was Sarah's research partner, the one who'd helped them initially identify the artifacts. Somehow Pemberton's people had found her. We have to help her, Sarah said, reading over his shoulder. It's a trap. Of course it's a trap. But she's innocent in all this. She only got involved because I asked her to. Sarah was already packing the photographs back into their envelope. Besides, we can't run forever. Maybe it's time we stopped playing defense. Marcus looked at the baseball bat, then at the ancient photographs that had already cost so many lives. In a few hours, they'd walk into almost certain death. But for the first time since this nightmare began, he felt something other than fear. He felt ready to fight back. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Manchester felt like stepping into a tomb. Marcus pulled his jacket tighter as their footsteps echoed through the cavernous space, dust motes dancing in the pale morning light, filtering through grimy windows. Sarah walked beside him, her hand never straying far from the pistol concealed beneath her coat. He's paranoid, but he has good reason to be, she murmured, scanning the maze of shipping containers and machinery. Reginald Ashworth spent 40 years as an archivist at the Tower of London before someone tried to kill him 3 times in 1 week. A figure emerged from behind a rusted forklift, elderly, bent with age, but his eyes sharp as broken glass. Reginald Ashworth moved with the careful precision of a man who'd learned that survival meant trusting no one completely. "You brought company," he said to Sarah, his voice carrying the weight of suspicion. "This is Marcus, the one I told you about." Ashworth studied Marcus with the intensity of someone examining a potentially forged document, the janitor who stumbled into a century of lies. "Show me what you found." Marcus carefully withdrew the leather portfolio from his backpack. The old man's reaction was immediate, his weathered hands trembling as he reached for it, then stopping short as if the documents might burn him. "Christ almighty," Ashworth whispered. "I hoped I'd never see these again." "You recognize them?" "Recognize them? Boy, I spent 20 years helping to bury these." Ashworth's fingers traced the air above the documents without touching them. Lord Pemberton's insurance policy. He was supposed to destroy them after the Queen Mother's death, but the greedy bastard kept copies. Sarah leaned forward. "Insurance against what?" The old archivist's laugh was bitter as winter wind, against the truth coming out. "You see, in 1953 there was a problem. The coronation was approaching, and someone discovered that Elizabeth's bloodline, well, let's say it wasn't quite as pure as the Church of England required." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the House of Windsor had a secret that would have toppled the monarchy before it truly began. Elizabeth's grandfather, George V, wasn't who everyone thought he was." Ashworth finally touched the documents, his hands steadier now. "These papers prove that George V was illegitimate, the result of an affair between Queen Alexandra and a Russian diplomat." "Precisely. So a small group of very powerful people made a decision. They would ensure the secret died with those who knew it, and they would create alternative arrangements." "Alternative arrangements?" Marcus echoed. Ashworth moved to one of the shipping containers and began working the lock with practiced efficiency. They couldn't change bloodlines, but they could change the crown jewels themselves. The originals, the ones with the true blessing, the true history, they had to disappear. New ones were crafted, blessed in secret ceremonies, and the switch was made 3 days before the coronation. The container door swung open with a metallic shriek that made Marcus jump. Inside, wrapped in moth-eaten blankets and sealed in humidity-controlled cases, sat treasures that defied imagination. The true crown jewels. The St. Edward's crown gleamed with an inner light that seemed to pulse with centuries of legitimacy. The imperial state crown's Black Prince's ruby caught the dim light and threw it back in bloody fragments. The sovereign's orb rested beside scepters that had touched the hands of kings whose right to rule was written in starlight and steel. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed. "These are the ones that carry the true authority," Ashworth said. "The ones used in Westminster Abbey are magnificent fakes, pretty enough to fool tourists and television cameras, but they're no more sacred than costume jewelry." Marcus stared at the artifacts, understanding finally dawning. "That's why people are willing to kill for this. It's not about money or even the historical value. It's about legitimacy itself. The current monarchy is built on a lie, protected by murder and maintained by fear." Ashworth began closing the cases with reverent care. These documents and these jewels together would end it all. Charles knows, William knows, the entire structure would collapse overnight. A distant sound, the rumble of vehicles approaching, cut through their conversation. Sarah was at the window instantly, cursing under her breath. 3 black SUVs, moving fast. Ashworth's face went pale. "They found us. How? Does it matter?" "Help me get these to the truck." Marcus grabbed 2 of the cases, while Sarah and Ashworth secured the documents and remaining artifacts. The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the warehouse, followed by the measured footsteps of professionals who'd done this before. "There's a service tunnel that leads to the old rail yard," Ashworth whispered urgently. "If we can reach it before they surround the building." The warehouse lights exploded in a shower of sparks and glass. In the sudden darkness, Marcus clutched the cases containing 1,000 years of stolen legitimacy and ran toward an uncertain future where kings and janitors were equally mortal. The warehouse smelled of rust and decades of forgotten secrets. Marcus crouched behind a shipping container, his heart hammering as footsteps echoed through the cavernous space. 3 days had passed since their narrow escape from the cathedral, and every shadow seemed to hide another threat. Sarah pressed against the corrugated metal beside him, her laptop bag clutched tight against her chest. "There," she whispered, pointing toward the far end of the warehouse where a single light bulb cast a sickly yellow glow over what appeared to be an office. Professor Whitmore lay unconscious in that makeshift prison, his white hair matted with dried blood. Marcus could see him through the grimy window, slumped in a chair with his hands bound behind him. 2 guards flanked the entrance, their automatic weapons clearly visible. "I count at least 6 of them total," Sarah breathed. "Maybe more on the upper catwalks." Marcus studied the layout, his janitor's eye automatically cataloguing exit routes and potential hazards. The warehouse stretched nearly a football field in length, filled with towering shelves and forgotten cargo. Industrial chains hung from the ceiling like sleeping serpents, and pools of oil stained the concrete floor. "We need a distraction," he said, then noticed something that made him smile grimly. "See that electrical panel near the loading dock?" Sarah squinted through the darkness. "Think you can kill the lights?" "Better than that." Marcus pointed to a cluster of rusted barrels marked with faded chemical warnings. "Those are industrial solvents, highly flammable. If I can create enough chaos—" Before Marcus could object, she was moving, her dark clothing helping her blend into the shadows between storage containers. He watched her disappear, then began his own approach toward the electrical panel, staying low and using the maze of abandoned equipment as cover. The first guard never saw him coming. Marcus had learned stealth from years of cleaning office buildings after hours, moving through spaces without disturbing the inhabitants. The man dropped silently, his weapon secured before he hit the ground. At the electrical panel, Marcus studied the circuit breakers and junction boxes. His years maintaining the university's aging infrastructure had taught him more than most people knew about industrial electrical systems. He traced the main power feeds, then carefully began loosening connections. The warehouse plunged into darkness with a shower of sparks that illuminated panicked shouts from the remaining guards. Marcus was already moving toward the solvent barrels when the emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in hellish red. "Find them!" a voice roared. "They're here somewhere!" Marcus unscrewed the cap on the nearest barrel and began spreading its contents in a wide arc across the floor. The chemical smell made his eyes water, but he forced himself to work methodically. One chance. He had to make it count. A gunshot echoed through the warehouse, then another. Marcus's blood turned to ice as he heard Sarah scream. He abandoned stealth and sprinted toward the office, pulling a road flare from his jacket, something he'd grabbed from their stolen car's emergency kit. 2 guards were dragging Sarah toward the office, while a third held Professor Whitmore at gunpoint. The elderly man was conscious now, blood trickling from a fresh cut on his forehead. "Stop right there!" The lead guard aimed his weapon at Marcus. "Drop whatever you're holding." Marcus raised the unlit flare. "You know what this is? A flare. So what? Do you know what I just spread across half this warehouse?" Marcus gestured toward the expanding pool of solvent that was slowly creeping across the uneven floor. "Industrial degreaser. Lights up like napalm." The guard's eyes widened as he caught the acrid smell. "You're bluffing. You'd kill us all, including your friends." "Maybe." Marcus's voice was steady despite the terror clawing at his chest. "But I've got nothing left to lose. You people have been hunting me for days. My life was already over the moment I opened that storage unit." Sarah met his eyes across the warehouse, and he saw understanding flash between them. She was positioned near a stack of wooden crates, close to one of the emergency exits he'd spotted during their approach. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus continued, his thumb hovering over the flare's striker. "You're going to let them go. All of you are going to walk away, and maybe, just maybe, we all survive the night." The lead guard hesitated, clearly calculating odds. That moment of uncertainty was all Sarah needed. She drove her elbow into her captor's ribs and dove behind the wooden crates as Marcus struck the flare and hurled it toward the spreading pool of chemicals. The warehouse erupted in flames that turned night into day, and in that blazing chaos everything changed forever. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Manchester felt like stepping into a tomb. Marcus clutched the leather journal against his chest as Sarah swept her flashlight across rusted machinery and cobwebs thick as curtains. The beam caught something metallic in the far corner, a heavy steel door marked with faded government seals. "This is it," Sarah whispered, checking her phone for the third time. According to the coordinates in Pemberton's notes, the evidence vault should be behind that door. Marcus approached the entrance cautiously, remembering how close they'd come to capture at the hotel. The crown jewels were safely hidden now, but without the supporting documentation that proved their authenticity and the conspiracy surrounding them, they were just expensive trinkets. The real power lay in what Pemberton had discovered about the royal succession, documents that could topple the monarchy itself. The door wasn't locked. It swung open with a groan that echoed through the empty space, revealing a narrow corridor lined with filing cabinets and metal shelving. Sarah's flashlight illuminated rows upon rows of boxes, each labeled with cryptic government codes. "Pemberton said he hid everything in Section K7, Marcus said, consulting the journal. "Something about insurance files from 1952. They moved deeper into the vault, their footsteps muffled by decades of dust. The air tasted stale and metallic. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, but every time he turned around, there was only darkness behind them. "Here!" Sarah called out, her voice tight with excitement. She was standing before a cabinet marked with the correct designation. The drawers were locked, but a crowbar from Marcus's janitor toolkit made quick work of the mechanism. Marcus held up one of the photographs, squinting at it in the flashlight beam. It showed a handwritten letter bearing the royal seal, dated 3 months before the current king's birth. The contents made his blood run cold. "Sarah, look at this. If these documents are genuine, then the entire succession is—" A slow clap echoed through the vault, cutting him off mid-sentence. Marcus spun around to see a figure emerging from the shadows, Sir Edmund Blackwood himself, flanked by 2 men in dark suits. The old aristocrat looked remarkably composed for someone who should have been in police custody. "Quite illuminating reading, I'm sure," Blackwood said, his voice carrying the same cultured tones Marcus remembered from their confrontation at the estate. "Though I'm afraid you won't be sharing those revelations with anyone." "How did you find us?" Sarah demanded, instinctively moving closer to Marcus. Blackwood smiled coldly. "My dear, did you really think we hadn't been monitoring Pemberton's known associates for decades? Every safe house, every contact, every hiding place, we've been watching them all. You led us right here." One of the suited men stepped forward, and Marcus recognized him as the same operative who'd nearly caught them at the hotel. His hand rested casually on something beneath his jacket, undoubtedly a weapon. "The beauty of this location," Blackwood continued, "is that it's so perfectly isolated. No one will think to look for you here for quite some time, and when they do find you, it will appear to be nothing more than a tragic accident. 2 treasure hunters who got in over their heads." Marcus's mind raced. They were trapped in a dead-end corridor with only one exit, and Blackwood's men were blocking it. The documents in his hands represented the evidence that could expose everything, but they wouldn't matter if he and Sarah didn't survive to present them. "You know," Marcus said, forcing his voice to remain steady, "I used to think the worst part of my job was cleaning up other people's messes, but it turns out some messes are worth making." He grabbed one of the heavy filing cabinets and threw his weight against it, sending it toppling toward Blackwood's men. The crash was deafening in the confined space, and in the chaos that followed, Marcus grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her toward a gap in the shelving he'd noticed earlier. They squeezed through just as gunshots rang out behind them, splinters of wood and metal flying in all directions. The gap led to another corridor, this one heading toward what Marcus hoped was an emergency exit. Behind them, he could hear Blackwood shouting orders, his composed facade finally cracking. "Don't let them escape. Those documents cannot leave this building." Marcus and Sarah ran through the darkness, guided only by Sarah's bouncing flashlight beam and the desperate hope that they could find another way out. The papers clutched in Marcus's hand felt heavier than the crown jewels themselves, the weight of truth that powerful people would kill to suppress. They had the evidence now. They just had to live long enough to use it. The helicopter's rotors thundered overhead as Marcus pressed himself against the cold stone wall of Westminster Abbey, clutching the leather satchel containing the real crown jewels. Sarah crouched beside him, her face pale in the flickering light from the street lamps. Detective Inspector Williams had vanished into the shadows 20 minutes ago, claiming he was coordinating with backup, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling they'd been abandoned. "We can't stay here," Sarah whispered, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid London air. "They'll have thermal imaging." Marcus nodded grimly. Through the narrow alley, he could see black SUVs positioned at every exit from Parliament Square. Lord Pemberton's men had them surrounded, and somewhere in that maze of vehicles and shadows lurked the man who'd orchestrated a century of deception. The satchel's weight seemed to increase with each passing moment. Inside were the genuine crown jewels, the ones stolen in 1917 and replaced with masterful forgeries to hide the royal family's desperate sale during the war, the ones that proved the monarchy had been built on a lie for over 100 years. A soft footstep echoed from the darkness behind them. Marcus spun around, his heart hammering, only to see Williams emerging from a service entrance to the Abbey. "This way," Williams hissed. "I've found us a way out." Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm. "How do we know we can trust him?" Williams overheard. "Because, Miss Chen, I just spent the last 20 minutes ensuring that the evidence you've gathered reaches the right people. There are still some in the government who believe in truth over tradition." Marcus studied the detective's face, searching for any sign of deception. Williams had saved them twice now, but Pemberton's influence ran deep through every level of British society. Anyone could be compromised. Lead the way. They followed Williams through a heavy wooden door into the Abbey's ancient interior. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the Gothic arches and tomb monuments. Their footsteps echoed off the stone floors despite their attempts at stealth. Williams led them through a maze of corridors Marcus never knew existed, past chambers filled with centuries of religious artifacts and historical documents. The weight of history pressed down on them. How many secrets had these walls witnessed? "There's a tunnel system," Williams explained in hushed tones as they descended a narrow spiral staircase. "Built during the Blitz for government officials, it connects to the underground stations. Behind them, the sound of splintering wood echoed through the Abbey. Pemberton's men had breached the entrance. They reached a metal door marked with faded wartime signage. Williams produced an electronic keycard and swiped it through a modern reader. Someone had updated the security recently. The door clicked open, revealing a utilitarian tunnel lined with pipes and cables. "How did you—" Sarah started to ask. 20 years on the force teaches you who to cultivate as allies," Williams replied. "The government has contingency plans for everything, including protecting witnesses in cases of national security." They hurried through the tunnel, emergency lighting flickering on automatically as they passed. Marcus could hear the distant sound of pursuit behind them, voices and footsteps amplified by the confined space. "There's something you need to know," Williams said as they reached a junction in the tunnel system. "Pemberton isn't working alone. This conspiracy involves current members of Parliament, senior royals, even people in my own department. The forgeries weren't just about hiding a wartime transaction. They've been used to manipulate succession, to control who sits on the throne." Marcus felt sick. "You're saying the current royal family has no legitimate claim," Williams finished. The line of succession was altered in 1937 using forged documentation. The rightful heir was pushed aside to prevent a German sympathizer from taking the throne during the war. Sarah stopped walking. So we're not just exposing a theft, we're exposing that Britain has had the wrong monarch for 80 years. The tunnel trembled slightly as a distant explosion echoed behind them. Pemberton's men were getting closer, and they weren't being subtle about it. "The extraction point is just ahead," William said, breaking into a run. "There'll be people there who can protect you and ensure this information reaches the international press." Marcus clutched the satchel tighter as they sprinted through the final stretch of tunnel. Behind them, flashlight beams began to pierce the darkness. Ahead lay either salvation or another trap. As they reached a heavy steel door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," Marcus realized that whatever happened next, the quiet life of a janitor was over forever. He was about to rewrite history. The safe house felt more like a tomb than a sanctuary. Marcus sat hunched over the dining room table, surrounded by scattered documents and photographs that painted a picture so damning it made his hands shake. Detective Sarah Chen paced behind him, her phone pressed to her ear as she argued with someone at Scotland Yard about protective custody protocols. "They're not listening," she said, ending the call with visible frustration. "Half the department thinks we're chasing conspiracy theories, and the other half—" She trailed off, but Marcus understood. The other half might already be compromised. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell emerged from the kitchen with 3 steaming mugs of tea, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled after their narrow escape from the museum. "I've been thinking about the timeline," she said, setting the mugs down carefully. "If Lord Pemberton's journal is accurate, the switch happened during the 1953 coronation preparations. That means whoever orchestrated this had access to the Tower of London, the Crown Jewellers, and the ceremony itself." Marcus picked up one of the photographs, a grainy image showing 2 nearly identical St. Edward's crowns side by side. "But why keep the real ones? Why not just destroy them and eliminate the evidence entirely?" "Insurance," Chen replied, finally sitting down. "Or leverage. Think about it. Whoever pulled this off created the ultimate blackmail material. They could bring down the monarchy whenever they chose." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. That's why they're so desperate to get these artifacts back. It's not just about the money or even the scandal. Someone's been holding this over the royal family for 70 years. Hartwell nodded grimly. "And now that secret is threatening to surface. The question is, who's been pulling the strings all this time?" Before anyone could answer, Chen's phone buzzed with a text message. Her face went pale as she read it. "We need to move. Now. My contact at the yard says there's been chatter about our location." Marcus was already gathering the documents when he heard it, the soft crunch of gravel outside. Chen drew her weapon in one fluid motion, motioning for silence. Through the gap in the curtains, Marcus could see black SUVs positioning themselves around the property. "Back door," Chen whispered, but even as she said it, they heard the sound of breaking glass from the kitchen. They were surrounded. Hartwell grabbed the metal briefcase containing the most crucial evidence, while Marcus stuffed the photographs into his jacket. Chen led them toward the staircase, but heavy footsteps were already thundering up from below. "The attic," Marcus hissed, remembering the layout from their arrival. They climbed quickly, Chen bringing up the rear with her weapon trained on the stairway. Behind them, voices echoed through the house, professional, coordinated, deadly serious. The attic was cramped and dusty, but it had what Marcus hoped for, a window overlooking the back garden. While Chen kept watch at the access hatch, he forced the window open. The drop to the garden shed below looked manageable, if terrifying. "Go," Chen urged. "I'll hold them here as long as I can." "We're not leaving you," Marcus protested, but she was already pushing him toward the window. "Someone needs to get that evidence to the media. Make sure this story gets told." She pressed a business card into his hand. "Contact my friend at The Guardian. Tell her Chen sent you." The sound of splintering wood came from below. They were breaking down doors, searching methodically. Hartwell went first, dropping onto the shed roof with surprising agility for someone her age. Marcus followed, his knees screaming as he hit the corrugated metal. They found themselves in a narrow alley between residential streets. Hartwell was breathing hard, clutching the briefcase against her chest. "My car," she gasped. "2 streets over." They moved quickly through the shadows, every sound making them flinch. Marcus kept thinking about Chen, hoping she'd managed to escape or at least survive. The detective had risked everything to help a janitor she barely knew, all because she believed in doing what was right. Hartwell's car was exactly where she'd left it, a practical blue sedan that wouldn't attract attention. As they drove away from the safe house, Marcus could see emergency lights flashing in the distance. Whether they belonged to Chen's backup or the people hunting them remained unclear. "Where to now?" Hartwell asked, her voice steadier than her hands on the steering wheel. Marcus looked at the business card Chen had given him, then at the briefcase containing 70 years of hidden truth. The end game was approaching, and they were running out of allies. "London," he said quietly. "It's time to tell the world what really happened to the crown jewels." The abandoned textile mill loomed against the storm-darkened sky like a broken tooth. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tighter as lightning illuminated the crumbling brick facade ahead. In the passenger seat, Dr. Eleanor Whitmore clutched the leather satchel containing the authentication documents that would expose everything. The crown jewels theft, the royal family's complicity, and the murders committed to hide it all. "Are you certain about Detective Harrison?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely audible over the rain hammering the windshield. Marcus nodded grimly. 3 days ago he'd trusted Harrison completely. Now he knew the detective had been feeding information to Victor Ashford's network from the beginning. The staged police raid, the convenient delays, the way evidence kept disappearing, it all made terrible sense. "He's been playing both sides since I found that storage unit," Marcus said. "Probably got paid more in the last month than his entire police salary." They pulled into the mill's gravel lot, headlights sweeping across rusted machinery and broken windows. Marcus had chosen this location carefully, isolated enough to avoid civilian casualties, but with enough escape routes if things went sideways, which, given their track record, seemed inevitable. Eleanor's phone buzzed. A text from the BBC journalist who'd agreed to broadcast their evidence, live. Ready when you are. "Story goes global in 20 minutes unless I hear otherwise. The insurance policy that might keep them alive if they survived the next 20 minutes. Movement in Marcus's rearview mirror made his pulse spike. 3 black sedans were approaching fast, headlights cutting through the rain like predatory eyes. No police sirens, no backup Marcus had called for, just Ashford's people arriving exactly as Harrison had probably promised they would. "They're here," Marcus said, grabbing the modified radio Dr. Pemberton had given him. The old historian had proven surprisingly resourceful with surveillance equipment. "Doc, you copy?" Pemberton's voice crackled through static. "I have eyes on the perimeter. 5 vehicles total, at least 15 men. Our detective friend just arrived with the last group." Marcus felt a bitter satisfaction at having his suspicions confirmed, followed immediately by cold fear. Harrison knew all their contingency plans. "Eleanor, remember what we discussed. If this goes wrong, I'm not leaving without you again," she said firmly. "We finish this together." The sedans formed a semicircle, trapping their car against the mill's entrance. Figures emerged from the vehicles, moving with military precision. In the center, Victor Ashford stepped out, his silver hair immaculate despite the downpour. Even from 50 yards away, Marcus could see the man's predatory smile. Harrison approached Ashford, and they spoke briefly before the detective pointed directly at Marcus's car. The betrayal still stung, even though Marcus had expected it. "Showtime," Marcus muttered, checking the recording device in his jacket pocket. Everything said in the next few minutes would be transmitted to Dr. Pemberton and then to news outlets worldwide. They climbed out of the car, Eleanor keeping the satchel close. The rain soaked through Marcus's jacket instantly, but he barely noticed. all his attention focused on Ashford's approaching figure and the armed men flanking him. "Mr. Webb," Ashford called out, his cultured voice carrying easily over the storm, "you've led us quite a chase. I do hope you understand this is where it ends." "Depends on your definition of ending," Marcus replied, raising his voice slightly for the recording device. "The whole world's about to learn what you've been hiding, Victor." Ashford's laugh was genuinely amused. "The world, my dear fellow? Who do you imagine would believe a janitor and a disgraced academic over the Crown itself? Detective Harrison has already prepared a very compelling narrative about your descent into madness. Tragic, really." Harrison stepped forward, hand resting on his weapon. The detective wouldn't meet Marcus's eyes. "Make this easy on everyone, Webb. Hand over the documents and the jewels." "Ah, Dr. Whitmore," Ashford said pleasantly. "Still playing academic even as your career burns around you. How admirable." Marcus checked his watch. 15 minutes until the BBC broadcast. Ashford's people were closing in, forming a tighter circle. In his earpiece, Dr. Pemberton's voice whispered updates on additional vehicles arriving at the perimeter. "You know what I find interesting, Victor?" Marcus said, buying time. "For someone so concerned about protecting royal secrets, you sure don't seem bothered by committing treason yourself." Ashford's expression darkened. "Everything I've done has been to preserve the stability of the Crown. The monarchy's symbolic power matters more than the literal authenticity of metal and stones. Tell that to the families of everyone you've killed, acceptable casualties in service of something greater than their small lives." The casual dismissal of murder chilled Marcus to the bone. This man would kill them without hesitation, then sleep peacefully believing he'd served Queen and country. Thunder crashed overhead as Ashford raised his hand, and Marcus realized their 20 minutes had run out sooner than expected. The morning sun cast long shadows across Westminster Bridge as Marcus approached the imposing facade of Scotland Yard. The weight of the evidence in his backpack seemed heavier with each step. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen was waiting for him at the entrance, her expression grave but determined. "Are you certain about this, Marcus?" she asked as they walked through the corridors. "Once we open this door, there's no going back." Marcus nodded, thinking of Tommy's lifeless body in that warehouse, of all the innocent people who had died to protect this secret. They've had a century to bury the truth. That's long enough. The conference room was filled with senior officials from various departments. Marcus recognized the commissioner, several high-ranking detectives, and representatives from the Crown Prosecution Service. At the head of the table sat a stern woman in her 60s who introduced herself only as Ms. Whitfield from the Cabinet Office. "Mr. Hayes," she began, "we understand you've made some rather extraordinary claims. Before we proceed, I must stress the gravity of what you're alleging and the potential consequences for all involved." Marcus set his backpack on the polished table and began removing items one by one. The ornate jewelry box came first, its surface gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Gasps filled the room as he opened it to reveal the unmistakable glitter of the real crown jewels. "These have been hidden for over 100 years, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "What's on display in the Tower of London are elaborate fakes, commissioned after the originals were stolen during a botched Republican plot in 1923. He placed the documents beside the jewels. King George V covered up the theft to prevent a constitutional crisis. The government has been perpetuating this lie ever since, murdering anyone who came too close to the truth." Ms. Whitfield leaned forward, studying the artifacts with a mixture of fascination and horror. "These are serious accusations, Mr. Hayes. Do you have proof of recent criminal activity?" Marcus pulled out his phone and played the recording of Lord Pemberton's confession. The room fell silent as they listened to the aristocrat's cold admission of multiple murders, his casual discussion of eliminating witnesses, and his plans to kill Marcus himself. "Lord Pemberton has been running a shadow organization within the government," Marcus continued. "They've killed historians, researchers, archivists, anyone who stumbled upon evidence of the cover-up." My friend Tommy Kowalski died because he tried to help me expose this conspiracy. Detective Inspector Chen spread out additional evidence she had gathered. We've identified at least 12 suspicious deaths over the past 30 years that can be linked to this cover-up. Car accidents, apparent suicides, sudden heart attacks, all involving people who had been researching the crown jewels or early 20th century royal history. The commissioner studied the documents with growing alarm. "Where is Lord Pemberton now?" "In custody," Chen replied. "We arrested him this morning at his estate. He's currently being held at Paddington Green. Several of his associates have also been detained." Miss Whitfield was examining one of the crowns with a jeweler's loupe. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary. These are definitely authentic." She set down the magnifying glass and looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Hayes, you understand that confirming the authenticity of these items would mean admitting that our government has been lying to the British people and the world for over a century?" "Yes," Marcus replied without hesitation. "But continuing the lie would mean that Tommy and all the others died for nothing." The room erupted in hushed conversations. Officials huddled in small groups, weighing the political implications against the moral imperative of justice. Marcus watched their faces, seeing the conflict between institutional loyalty and basic human decency. Finally, the commissioner stood up. "The evidence is overwhelming. We have recorded confessions of multiple murders, documented proof of a conspiracy, and what appears to be the genuine crown jewels. We have no choice but to proceed with a full investigation." Miss Whitfield nodded reluctantly. "I need to brief the Prime Minister immediately. This will require careful handling. The constitutional implications are staggering." As the meeting concluded and officials began filing out, Detective Inspector Chen approached Marcus. "You know this is just the beginning, don't you? The trial will be a media circus. Your life will never be the same." Marcus looked out the window at the bustling London street below. Just 2 weeks ago, he had been a struggling janitor whose biggest concern was making rent. Now he held the power to rewrite history and bring justice to those who thought themselves untouchable. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," he said with a slight smile. "Besides, someone has to speak for those who can't speak for themselves anymore." As they prepared to transport the evidence to a secure location, Marcus felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced since finding that first mysterious box. The truth was finally free, and no amount of power or privilege could bury it again.